Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you all to Valerie Beaulieu, who's the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer and member of the Executive Committee of the Adecco Group. She was previously Chief Marketing Officer at Microsoft US, leading the marketing function across the region's B2B portfolio. Her career at Microsoft spanned 24 years, during which she held various senior leadership roles across North America, Asia, and Europe. Valerie is also the vice president of the French Foreign Trade Advisors and a director and board member of the French multinational telecommunications company Orange. The Adecco Group is the world's leading talent company. Through its three global business units, Adecco, Acadis, and LHH, across 60 countries, the company enables sustainable and lifelong employability for individuals, delivers digital and engineering solutions to power the smart industry transformation, and empowers organizations to optimize their workforces. So thanks for coming on the show, Valerie.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully, I did your amazing career justice, but just in case, can you walk us through your career?
Of course, so as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for the Adecco Group, which I joined 3 years and a half ago. Since last April, I'm also the president of Pontoon, which is one of the subsidiary of the group. I joined the group, as you mentioned, after 30 years in the tech industry, 24 at Microsoft. And before that, I need to say I was a journalist, as curious as it may sound. So I was very lucky during all my career to travel the world, as you mentioned. I am originally French, as maybe you can pick into my accent. But I've lived in the US, I've lived in Singapore, I've lived in London. So all these many places that is really attracting my own curiosity also of living abroad. We can talk about that if you're interested. Also, I got very interested to add many pivots in my career. As I mentioned, I started as a journalist. I did communication. I did marketing. I was a sales leader. I was a chief operating officer. I was a managing P&Ls. So I think there is also, I was very blessed and I'm very grateful for all these opportunities that I've got all along my career. That's me.
Well, Valerie, all right. Rick and I both, I guess we could say we're journalists, right? We, write for Forbes. Rick writes for Blind and for other publications. How do you make that pivot? Because that seems like a wild pivot to go from a journalist to go into tech and then to go into heading up marketing. How did that happen?
So it started when I was very young. And when you're younger, you have these dreams and sometimes even a myth around some jobs. And my dream job was becoming a journalist. I was dreaming about telling these fantastic stories about all that was happening in the world. And so I started my career first in the radio space, that will tell you about my age. And then I went to printed newspaper. So I've never worked in the internet per se. But then I realized it was really feeding my curiosity, journalism. It was really feeding my curiosity. I also love to write, love to tell stories. But I was feeling a bit frustrating to see all these people being out there impacting the world in a way or another, whether they're small world or the bigger world. And I was just there telling the story. So I felt it was time for me to jump over the fence and to be on the side of the people doing. So that's how I made my first pivot. It was wild because obviously I was coming with a journalist diploma and I knew nothing about marketing. So this was an interesting move.
Well, is there a connection? And Rick, because you're in the same boat a little bit. So, like, is there a connection? Is that as a writer, as a journalist, reporter, you're telling stories and you're navigating, what's going on? Is that is that dovetailed into marketing and sales? So that is that how you kind of got in there? So you had that type of experience?
Absolutely. I think storytelling has become more and more a key attribute of good marketing. I would say of good sales as well. It's all about how you tell the story and how you listen to the need from your clients and you really tell the story of how you can help them. I would say more importantly is all that relates to curiosity as well, because I realized that as I grew and developed in my career, one of the common thread was to go to the new things and to constantly learn new skills. You know, I had to learn from being a journalist to becoming a marketing person, from being a marketing person to becoming a salesperson, then to become a leader. And it's I think this concept for me of the backpack. That's really the image I have. I started my career with an empty backpack. Well, some diplomas, some graduation, and we know that in the world of today's, what you've learned at school will bring you so far in your career. You need to be constantly learning to stay current. And so the idea of having that backpack, I started with knowing how to be curious, ask questions, how to tell a story. Then I went to marketing, how to drive an impact from these stories. Then I went to sales, how to use curiosity to ask questions to your clients, etc., etc. And filling my backpack with a tool set that will enable me and accompany me all along my career.
So when you first made that pivot to marketing, do you recall like what you were doing, like for, let's say, for Microsoft? Do you remember what kind of campaigns you were running?
Oh yes, when I joined Microsoft, I was a young marketeer, and just to give you a sense, Microsoft at the time was 60 people in Europe. So just to tell you, it was the very early days. And when I was running marketing, I was doing the mouse campaign in the morning. I was doing the Windows launch at lunchtime, and I was working on all that was becoming the Bill Gates Foundation. At the time, it was not the Bill Gates Foundation. It was all the corporate impact that Microsoft was driving, and I was doing this at night. So the breadth of topic, you could argue, was not even marketing. It was much broader than that because we were still in startup mode, and all that we have to cover was really fun.
It just get some context at that time, not only from in Europe, but in the US, how like what size was Microsoft at that particular time when you started?
When I started, as I mentioned to you, Europe was only 60
Right.
people. We were launching the website. There was the Microsoft.com website was in its infancy. So that was a very exciting moment. And I need to say that's also something along my career that probably was a red thread is going to the new things, the new frontiers. When I joined the tech industry, this was still a very nascent industry. All my friends who were doing marketing, they were all going to, the big Procter and Gamble and Nestle, etc., Unilever of the world. These were the hype brands. You were going to the consumer brands. And so it was absolutely not hype to go work for a tech company, which was doomed to be all engineers and very boring tech talk. So but this has become something that has changed over time, and I've learned so much about the industry and how you make it interesting. So that was an amazing experience.
I mean, picking on your analogy of the backpack and how empty it might have felt when you moved over from West France to, um, you know, tech industry, the B2B side, was there a mentor or something along the way that really inspired you and kind of pushed you and made that transition a little bit easier? Because going from one of the top newspapers in France to, um, something that is just getting started can be quite challenging.
That's a very good question, and I need to say no. I was just in my early 20s, and I knew nothing. I was so new, and at the time at school they didn't tell you, well, to manage your career you need to have a mentor, you need to have like your board of directors, etc. When you're in your 20s, you just like, okay, I want to do something different. You look at the newspaper and you go to the next job. So that was how I did my first pivot from journalism to the tech industry. By the way, my family was like, we have no clue what the tech industry is. So there was really no one I could ask. Even my friends, they didn't have computers. They didn't know what email was. So it was really a jump into the unknown. I need to say, because I was being provocative and maybe a bit playful, in my next pivot, I absolutely understood that I needed to have some advice. And so over time, I did had mentors. And you mentioned in the generous presentation you did of my career that I also pivoted from different geographies. That's another type of pivot. When you pivot from being a French person living in France, working in France, to becoming a French person moving across the ocean. And actually, I moved to Seattle, so even across the continent, to take a worldwide role. That's a completely different pivot and a completely different dimension. And this is where I did feel that having mentors that I could consult, having my board of directors to help me think through the pros and the cons, which I didn't have that support when I was in my 20s. But here, having these people that could help me and also support me, having these cheerleaders, because I was still relatively young in my career. I'm still young, by the way, but I was younger, let's say that. And I think there was also that doubt, am I able? Am I capable? And what I found super interesting is that having this board of directors who would not only advise me on, yes, this is a good opportunity, but also cheering me, saying, we trust you, you're going to do it, you're going to make it. I think this was absolutely critical for me.
So let me unpack some of this because this is a lot. How did you, I mean, to go from France to Seattle, that's huge. Did you know anybody there? Did you have, anybody to help you, or you just said, all right, I'm going there and I'm building, a new life here?
Yeah, moving from one country to the other, I was already a mom with two kids and obviously my husband. This was a process. Actually, I would, unless you're very young in career, like I did when I moved from journalism to marketing, I would advise from making the jump without thinking through what you're doing, because it has an impact beyond your own individual person. Here, I was impacting my entire family who moved with me to the US, notwithstanding the fact that my husband had to resign to join me. So the first thing we did was we did a family council. So can you imagine, my kids were 12 and 10, and we did that family council. Okay, we're going to move to the US. What does it mean at a personal level? To your point, these questions of where are we going to live? Are we going to have a house? Are we going to have a yard? Where are we going to go to school? The kids were asking, though they were not really asking. We provoked the conversation. Do we have to speak English to go to school in the US? So having that family council for me was super important, because if you want to be very effective as a leader and as a professional, you need to make sure that you have a strong anchor in your personal life. And for me, that was very important, because I've seen colleagues who moved to the US didn't spend the right amount of time to align their family or their support. Sometimes it's just your friends on how you're going to support the move. And then it turns out a total disaster, because you have to learn a new job, a new network of colleagues. Even in my case, it was in the same family. If at home your family is unhappy or your support system is unhappy, you won't be supported. So making sure that you take care of the environment so that you can be 200% in your career was critical for me.
And then in Seattle, you took on worldwide marketing, right?
Yes, I had one intermediary step, which was also an interesting story. Before taking on the marketing role in the US subsidiary, I was working in the advertising business. And when I moved, I moved because I was on the bench to replace the chief operating officer for that division of Microsoft. And so I was there for the first 6 months, and my boss left the company. And the boss of my boss at the time opened the role. And I was like, oh, I'm just 6 months in the role. It's too early. I've just moved from France to the US. I'm just getting my insurance rights. I just got my driving license. I'm still in the throes of figuring out my personal life. And the job becomes empty. This is the job that was the reason why I moved to the US in the first place. It was because I was on the bench to take that role. And here I am thinking, too early, I'm not capable enough. So I started to talk to some of my board of directors, my mentors, and say, yeah, you're capable, you're fantastic, you can do a good job. But still, I was doubting myself. I was looking in my backpack. Yeah, I probably had a solid backpack by the time, but still I wouldn't go there. And it had to take the boss of my boss who came to see me and say, why aren't you applying? Like, this job is for you. Why aren't you applying? And it really took him to say, yeah, I want you. That's why he's gone. So that's the promise that we made to you. We got you to the US to take that job, just apply. And so that's how I became the chief operating officer of the advertising team in the US.
Wow. I mean, I want to dive a little bit deeper there in terms of, spending more than 20 years at Microsoft. The way you describe it, it seems like a quite linear, straight line in terms of almost like a destiny, right? In terms of the role or leadership that you were meant to have. I mean, along the way, can you walk us through some of the pivotal moments in terms of promotions or kind of like significant learnings or gains in like function or expertise along the way?
I would say it may look like linear, but it was not that linear. And maybe I'll tell you the story of two moments. The first moment was at the time I was working for Microsoft at European level. And my husband was tired of me traveling all the time. You see, I go back to my personal life because it's always a balance between what's happening in your personal life and your working life. I was having a lot of fun doing this international role at European level. But my husband was like, hey, no, now it's my turn to take an international role. You go national. So I love Microsoft. I look for a job in the French subsidiary. And there was a job that was completely along my capability. I apply and I don't get the job. And they tell me, no, we don't get you because you are an external recruit, because I was coming from Europe. So this was fun. Like you see, even in these big companies, sometimes there is also like you have to apply for a job. And so they prefer people that were already in the French subsidiary. And then the next role that came up was a role where I felt that I was totally overqualified. I was managing the full marketing for Microsoft at European level. And that role was just to report to the person who was managing marketing for just small business. And I was like, I'm going to be bored after 2 minutes. This is, I didn't feel that I was arrogant. It was just that the role was scoped in so much smaller than what I was managing. And this is when I went to my mentor. We were talking about the importance of the role of the mentor. And he told me a piece of wisdom that at the time I had a hard time to believe, but thank God he was here to convince me. He said, sometime in a career, it's good to take a step down to rebound even faster. And I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds like, wisdom, but I don't see the truth into that. I'm just gonna, I'm throwing all that I have in my backpack and just taking a step down. And his point of view was, yes, but wait a minute. You don't know the conditions of the French subsidiary. You don't know the people. They don't know you. They don't know if you're capable. So you also need to learn how to work in this new environment. There will be other people that are important, other stakeholders. And if it is easy for you to do that because it's really within your capabilities, you will have plenty of time to first be 100% successful and maybe do stretch project that will get you, in a good bias towards the next job. That's exactly what happened. I followed his advice. I took this job, which was on paper much smaller than the role that I was having at European level. After 18 months, I was promoted because I was overperforming in my role. I have taken so many stretch projects that I was immediately identified as a fast growing talent. I got actually promoted twice, first to be the chief operating officer of that division, and then to be the head of sales and marketing for that division. And that's why sometimes words of wisdom and the linearity, sometimes it's good also to reflect and take a step back to just accelerate further.
Wow. I imagine there has to be some kind of courage behind being willing to kind of take that quote unquote lower step, because it almost seems counterintuitive, right? That you have to go down to go up, to leapfrog. I mean, are there other kind of things that surprised you in terms of these kind of career truisms or lessons that um, people have taught you, or shared with you, that you didn't immediately see kind of where it might lead?
Well, so this one was a big lesson for me. Like, yes, sometimes you need to take a step down to re-accelerate. Another thing that surprised me, even within the same corporation, changing role, and I've changed role multiple times, probably every 3-4 years I was changing roles. And usually it was a process, like 5, 6, 7, up sometime to 10 interviews to get to the next role. And there was this one time, actually after that stellar career that I had in the French subsidiary that I've just told you about, where I was ready for a move. And so I called one of the vice president that I really admire, a woman who was at the time the head of Spain, and she had just become the vice president for a big division, the big consumer division in Europe. And I just call her and I say, hey, I'm looking for my next move. I would love to work with you. I really admire the work that you do. Just checking in if there is anything that could come up in your remit. I promise you, she said, oh, great. I'm opening my chief of staff role. This will become my CEO. Are you ready to join? Yes. Okay. Yes. Shall I call you? Shall I talk to your assistant for an interview? I was like, she said, no, it's okay. Can you start Friday? That's it. So this was this one
Wow.
occasion where I got the role literally on a phone call. This happened only once to me. The lesson, because there is a lesson, the lesson is you should always nurture your network. Because this was a lady that I've known over my time at Microsoft. She knew what I was doing. I was always in touch with her. We were just close professionally. You never know when there will be an opportunity like that, when she was desperate to have someone very quick. And when I call her, it was just the right call at the right moment to the right person. I got the job in 3 days. And so I think this power of the network is just incredible. I had another story like that, though not completely as fast, but when I moved to Singapore, it was similar. I also gave a phone call to people that I know in my network, and they gave me the opportunity. I remember I talked to that guy who was the president of Asia at 8:30 for breakfast. He said, okay, at 10 a.m., can you talk to the guy who can recruit you? And I remember calling my husband at 9 o'clock saying, okay, I may have a proposal to move to Singapore. Are you in? Because at 10, I may have to say yes. And my husband is playful. He said, okay, let's do it. And so at 10, I had the first interview. It was a slightly longer process, but just to tell you that sometimes the power of a network can create acceleration that you don't expect.
So let's talk about that for a little bit in terms of the network. And you talk about a board of directors. How can, for some people, they feel uncomfortable networking. You hear networking and it has that ick feeling, like, you're going into a meeting with your tag on your lapel and a sweaty handshake. What can people do? And maybe you could share with the audience, because you seem to be very fluid in doing this and very comfortable. A lot of people aren't. How do you develop the muscles to network, reach out to strangers, make people like you, become charismatic? Because you seem to naturally flow into this, but most people don't. So what's the secret? Like, what's What can people learn from this?
Well, I don't know if I am fluent on networking,
Hmm.
um, but one thing that is sure, I'm curious about others, probably coming from my journalist original experience, and I'm genuinely curious about people. And so when I network, first I don't think I'm networking. I'm just curious about knowing others. I'm just curious about who are you? What do you do? Where are you coming from? What are your interests? And that's how you just get proximity and create proximity with people by just being genuinely interested about them. You'd be surprised, and I'm also a mentor to a lot of my mentees, and I'm encouraging them to do networking. I am yet to see someone who doesn't want to talk about them, who is not proud about what they do. Usually, when you ask people about what are you doing, where do you live, what do you love, where are you coming from, and then one question leading to the other, people are usually they usually feel happy to talk about them. Usually, they're usually proud about talking about their job, and that's how you create that proximity. I remember one day I was talking to this guy. He was from South Africa. We were in a big, it was a big like training session. It's so we just got to know each other, the usual, like, hey, what's your name? What do you do? How long have you been in the company? Do you have kids? What do you love? Yeah, I love sailing. Oh, me too. Or no, I prefer doing yoga in the. And guess what? This guy, years later, the guy is from South Africa. There is no link to my business. I'm in Europe at the time. We have zero link. He's in a space that is not my space. We're not working together at all. 5 years later, this is the 31st of December. It's closing time for Microsoft. I have to get all my contracts in so that my bonus will be counted. And so my contracts are slightly smaller than the big guys, so I need to ask a favor. And so I look at the guys who are processing all the contracts. Who is the head of that team? That guy from South Africa.
No way.
Guess what? I give him a call and say, hey, how are you doing? And we talk about the old days. I say, hey, I have a big favor to call. Can you put my contract on top of the pile? So you never know. We just became friends at the training. We and I think that's probably the secret of networking. You don't network thinking this is going to be useful one day. You network because you're genuinely interested in the person, and you create a rapport that will create that proximity that it will come back one day or another.
Yeah, I love it. I found out over the years, particularly with recruiting, is tell me if this makes sense. And Rick, you probably see this too as a PR person, is that most people, you know, no one really asks them about what they do. Do you enjoy what you do? And ask those questions. So when you do and you actually listen to the person, then they love you because like, wow, because if I come home and I'm going to speak to my wife and kids, they have zero interest in hearing what I have to talk about. Right. But but other people, when they start talking about it, they light up, right? They're like so excited that someone cares about me and someone wants to hear about my day and what I'm doing. That's like a powerful tool, isn't it? It gets people to really gravitate towards you.
100%. I totally agree. It's about this genuine curiosity in the other person, humanity. And I sometimes pompously I'm saying I'm a humanist. I am attracted, I am fascinated by every human. Like I found everyone fascinating. Everybody has a fascinated story, and I'm genuinely curious about the each other's humanity. And for me, that's also I say that comes from my original journalist, but maybe I was a journalist because I'm interested in others.
Right.
I really appreciate that reminder in humanism because I feel like networking, Jack, to your point earlier, it seems like everyone approaches it in a way that's very tactical,
Mhm.
right? They go into a certain event or a certain meeting or a certain call, and they say, well, I really need a job, or I don't know anyone here, so I need to make, at least 5 friends and get their email address and LinkedIn profiles or whatever it might be. And you have this goal, and the entire time you're really not in that moment, right? You're just looking at that person as a means to a particular end. And as a journalist, I often experience that when PR people, they reach out to me, they pitch you about how do I get their company, their client in the news, and they don't really think about what my goals are, in terms of I need to tell an interesting story for my audience, right? It needs to be newsworthy, it needs to be notable, it needs to be recent. And they're just trying to think about me. But whereas, Valerie's approach is no, let's actually take a step back and think about, um, who's that other person on the other side. And it's almost taking that big picture approach, which I think more people could benefit from doing.
Will you help someone you don't like? I think that's the question we should ask ourselves when we network. No, you're going to help someone you like. So, and you will like someone that you got to know and you establish a relationship. So that's something that is always in my mind as well.
And just piggybacking off the Microsoft, what, about 3 years ago, you moved over to Adecco? Is that about right? In terms of
Correct. Yes.
timeline? And Adecco, maybe you could share, because it's a huge global, ginormous entity, but some people in the audience may not know it. Maybe you could share a little bit of what Adecco is about and what you're doing currently at Adecco.
Yes, absolutely. So the Adecco Group is one of the world leader of HR solutions. And so we cover the entire spectrum of HR services, from helping on recruitment, whether it is for temp worker, permanent workers, but also everything that has to do with career mobility, upskilling, reskilling, consulting in the tech areas. So we're really covering the full spectrum. What really attracted me, and we talked about career pivots, this was another big pivot to get out of 30 years of the tech industry into the HR solution. And I did talk to my board of directors. I did look into my backpack. And I reached out to my network. So I think everything we're talking about was at play into my last pivot. But in the end, what it was really about, there is a point, and maybe this is the Maslow pyramid. I have a bit of gray hair, so you get into some different place as you grow as a professional. First, you craving for recognition. Well, you craving first for money because you don't have the money. So first you're craving for money. Once you have the money, you're craving for recognition, and then there is a point where you're ready to just give back. And so what I was really looking for is purpose. And what I really love about the Adecco Group is that we are very strongly anchored into our impact on society, ensuring that we provide everybody the dignity of work, that we make the future work for everyone, like they can get a job that they love, they can live fulfilling life, and growing in their job. So I was really, really attracted with that, societal impact that we were driving as a company. The other thing that was really interesting for me is I've learned so much when I was in the tech industry. One of the things that was really striking is that I was always selling digital transformation. And what my clients were struggling with was not so much the tech. What they were struggling with is, how do I take advantage of all these new tools in my company to realize a business benefit, whether to grow my business or to be more efficient? And the main issue was, well, I don't have the right skills in my organization. I don't have the right processes in place. I may need to hire new people. And so the main blocker to really realize the potential of digital transformation was actually people. And that's what the Adecco group is really taking care of, is to make sure that your organization is ready to embrace whatever change is coming at you. And we know there's been a lot of crises that we had to look at in the recent years. So I think this also power of impacting what's critical for the enterprise was also very attractive to me. And then the other pivot for me was I've learned so much again in my career as a salesperson, as a marketing person, as driving operations, driving P&Ls. I felt I could also help the industry to transform in my very little modest way, because when you think about the industries in the general economy, the HR solution has remained very pivoted on the individual relationship, not so much automated. So I felt there was a lot that I could bring also in how we could go to the next level of also embracing technology. And AI is one of the big hype at the moment, but we've been doing this for quite a while at the Adecco group to make sure that we get the technology to support the mission that we have. So I feel very good about that pivot. A lot of people are telling me, how is it to move from 30 years in the tech industry to move in the HR solution? Well, I'm absolutely fulfilled and excited to be in that mission for the broader benefit of the society.
That makes a lot of sense, because also 30 years of doing something, it's time for change. And I see that's part of your story, is like you've constantly looking for changes, whether it's going to Singapore, go to Seattle, or what have you. So I think, Rick, what do you think about this too? It's by moving around, maybe that's what keeps you fresh and keeps building a network, because you're not just static at one place and one type of, and just fixating on that. You say, hey, all right, let me go to Seattle. Let me go to Singapore. Let me go back to Europe, right? That keeps it fresh.
I
Right.
agree.
Perhaps you're drawing the bridges, right?
I agree. And, I think also what experience has told me is that especially in the current environment, and that has been accelerated in the recent years, there's no such thing as a fixed role with a fixed set of skills forever. Actually, all this acceleration of the multiple crises like COVID, and then supply chain after the war, well, the war that is still there in Ukraine, and the multiple crises that are unfortunately coming up at us, we need to be constantly fresh in our skills, being curious to constantly learn and don't stay stuck in the status quo, but really looking at, okay, what else do I need to learn? Can I transpose a learning from one place to the other, and being constantly curious? This is also something that we see with our own clients in the Adecco group, where the big question they have is, how do I keep my workforce current? Because I need to constantly transform my processes. We talked about AI just a minute ago. We know it will transform some of the jobs. It may create new jobs. How do I constantly adjust? And I think there's tons of statistics that shows that we are likely to have, I think it was like more than 12 careers in the foreseeable future. So I think I was just the example of that, because I've had multiple jobs in multiple geographies, in multiple contexts. But I think this is becoming a trend that more and more we have to cope with if we want to stay current in the marketplace.
So in a way, you're a trendsetter, because what I see now with the and I wonder if you see this at Deco, with the Gen Zs, they'll move around a lot. And I remember when I first started working, and let's say in recruiting, if I sent a resume to a hiring manager and they were only there for a year or two, the hiring manager would say, Jack, what are you doing? Like, this person is a job hopper. And they really wouldn't even want to meet the person. Now, fast forward, like your career, it's like keep moving, keep learning, keep meeting new people. So it sounds like one of the takeaways from your career journey is that don't be afraid to keep trying something new and different, whether it's a different city, a different country, a different type of organization. And the more you do these things and push yourself out of the comfort level, you learn and grow. Because it does have to be a little, I imagine for yourself, it had to be scary at times to take these big leaps. But then after you do it, you probably feel like wonderful and invincible that you like were able to do this great thing.
I don't think that I feel invincible, but I suddenly feel that I feel my backpack quite a bit.
Mhm.
And I think, Rick, you were talking earlier about linear career. If there is something that was not me, is I never started thinking one day I will be whatever, pick, CEO, chief sales and marketing officer. I never set on a path to say, this is where I want to go. What I wanted to do is fill in my backpack with experience that will build on each other, be complementary. I wanted to have a backpack that will become my superpower. Like I would have this superpower on my backpack that I could use because my experiences were building on each other. And that's also something that it even though I didn't have like a destination, what I wanted to make sure was that I was filling my backpack with things that will build on each other. So always having something that I could bring into the role. So it was I never hopped from one role where I knew nothing about the geography, knew nothing about the job, knew nothing about the company. There was always an anchor that I was bringing with me. When I moved to the US, for example, so this big jump from France to the US, the only thing that I was changing was the environment because I knew the job. The job I knew because I moved with the job. So when I moved to Singapore, same story. I also knew the job that I was going after. When I moved to being the chief operating officer of the advertising business, there was already one good third of the role that I master. So I had to learn only two-thirds. So I think making sure that in your backpack you have enough anchor so that you don't have to learn 100% at the same time, for me was also critical, and probably more critical than just having a destination and trying to get to that destination.
Wow, I'm so impressed because all these companies, they invest so much in terms of talent development, having really clear job ladders, these performance reviews and evaluations to help guide people along, and they make it seem like, oh yeah, of course these are the expectations at this certain level, and it's almost like a game, right, in terms of leveling up. And to your point, it's more about what the skills and functional areas of expertise, the domains, the relationships, the network that you're building that become more important. How do you how did you discover that in terms of kind of breaking that mold of this kind of easy formula that a lot of these companies they want to share with you, they want people to follow, and instead following your own path, finding your own personal board of directors and saying, actually, it's more of a backpack that I need to build.
I think one is not exclusive of the other because I've been
Okay.
extremely blessed and supported in my career at Microsoft by all the programs they have in place, and we have in place in the Adecco group as well to support top talent. So filling the backpack was also a factor of the training I was lucky to be attending and the coaching I was receiving, etc. So I would say it's not mutually exclusive. It's actually
Uh,
complementary. And I want to also be very clear. There is some of my own merit and my own courage, certainly, but there is a lot that was facilitated by the company. Also gave me the chance to have this experience. So I think they're not mutually exclusive. But what is absolutely true, though, and I think it's what you're saying, Rick, and also what Jack was saying, is that companies, and I would say still today, the majority of the company continues to think about career as a ladder. Exactly what you described. It's a ladder. So you start at the bottom and you grow the ladder. Where we are today, and we're doing tons of research in the Adecco group, and I think I am one of these examples. Actually, the ladder doesn't work. Like, it's not because you are a junior marketer that you will become in 25 years the top chief marketing officer if you just go up the ladder. it's very likely that a better marketing officer will be someone who will be filling the backpack, acquiring skills along the way in something that will be much more messy to bring the most value in the top job. So I think what you're describing is that indeed, and it's very hard for companies to do it otherwise, at least for now. Maybe AI will enable to do it slightly differently. But today it was really, how do I understand the progression of people is from starting junior and finishing senior. So very much vertical. I think what AI is going to empower is the true skills economy, where you are going to judge the capability of the people and their ability to perform by the skills they're acquiring in a journey that will be much messier, I would say. And so back to my backpack, what do they bring into their backpack into the role?
I want to dig in there, right? Because it almost seems like, I mean, to your point, right? There's a lane, and it seems like to become an executive, it's almost like a race to who gets there fastest. But, you know, as you developed in your career over time and you landed these executive roles with larger and larger scope, how did you add to your responsibility? How did you demonstrate that impact along the way, that, you know, showed others, oh, you know, it's okay for me to take this on, or you're right to give me these extra projects or this added scope along the way?
Well, I think it's probably two things. The first thing is there's no shortcut. You need to perform in your job and you need to work hard. Let me start with that, because some people may say, okay, what's the secret sauce? Can we just with a few network? No, the first thing you bring to the party is your performance, like the fact that you drove successfully project, that you know drove business back to growth. So your impact is your first proof points. I would say if you show that, and then you have the right network, people knowing about that, and you have also sponsors, people who can talk about you when you were not in the room, which is very usually a byfactor of the impact that you've driven. I think that's the other element. And then there is a third element, which sometimes people forget, which is your own behavior. Because you could be a fantastic performer, but be a total jerk, like, not being collaborative, or not being clear in giving direction. Sometimes we say, you recognize a leader even if it's not a manager, because you have people who are able to drive clarity on the path forward, even if they're not themselves manager and they really manage through influence. So I think these three elements of, do you have the track record that shows that you are somebody who delivers on whatever you're given? You have the right level of network that knows you, that understand what you can deliver, that can be your sponsor in some elements. And then you have the right attitude. You're curious, you're open, you're collaborative, you're authentic. I think for a leader, that's a key trait as well, the authenticity. You're authentically yourself. I think these are probably the three elements that will make the package the right package.
I mean, on that note, do you have any advice for the professional that's the middle of their career? They might see some members of their team seem to be schmoozing their way to the top, or, getting through in terms of politics. For that person that might be frustrated in that messy middle, um, what would you say to that person in terms of how they can kind of keep forward and continue on in their career?
Well, I've not been so much interested in how others reach whatever means. So I think that's not the point. Just stay focused on what you do and who you are. And I want to spend just a minute on who you are, because it took me a while in my career to determine for myself do I really know where is my passion? Uh, because what we need to distinguish, and that was also a word of wisdom from one of my manager, is there are things you're good at. For example, I'm good at numbers. I'm good at numbers. I'm super fluent with Excel. I do my own pivot table. So people would use me for analytics and stuff. And then one of my manager came and see me and he said, you know what, you need to decide what you really want to do because else people will drive you. And it made me think about, yeah, I know I'm good with numbers, but do I want to be in finance? No, that's not my passion. Where do you get your flow? And your flow is where are the things that you can spend hours and you just look at the clock and say, oh my, it's been 2 hours because this is your flow. You're happy. You, not only you're good at it, but you love it. And I think what I've been striving is how do I converge what I'm good at and what I love doing. And I think when you are there, it's nirvana because this is where, this famous phrase, like you no longer have a job, you just have your own passion. So, but when you are younger in career, you are still trying to discover, okay, I know I'm good at that. So is it who I am? Well, maybe no, you're here, you're someone else, and you need to reconcile your passion with what you're good at and to reach that fulfillment in your job.
Yeah, that's great advice for anybody. I love that because whoever, when you're not in the flow, and sometimes then you have to realize maybe I'm just not in the right career, not in the right job. Because when you are in the flow and you're in the zone, it's like it's awesome. It's awesome whether it's in a job or in sports. You see a baseball player, football, whatever, soccer player, they're in the flow. It's like a beautiful thing to watch. So I love that. And maybe that's a good also metric for people to see if you have it, then you know you're maybe in the right place. And if you don't, perhaps maybe you have to start looking for something else. You don't like numbers and you're not passionate about numbers. Let's try something different. So that's great advice.
No, Valerie, I really appreciate you opening up through sharing your career story, your career arc, and um, inviting us to be kind of having you join our personal board of directors. So thanks for coming on the show, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie. This is awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, a pleasure.